Welcome back to In Response cEDH. My name is Albert, and today we have another great EDH gameplay video for you. Today's episode is a special one. It's our 20th episode. Thank you all for tuning in week after week. We hope to keep this momentum up and continue posting more Commander content for the MTG community. With that said, let's introduce our players. Matt is back and he's brought his Tibalt Cosmic Imposter deck. This deck aims to outvalue the table using their own resources against them. He keeps an opening hand of Sol Ring, Curse of Opulence, Wheel of Misfortune, Goldspan Dragon, Solemn Simulacrum, Scalding Tarn, and a Mountain. Daniel came to play today and brought his high-powered commander, Jhoira. This deck is about casting free artifacts and drawing cards until it combos off. He starts the game with a Mana Crypt, Sol Ring, Bellbook, Words of Wind, Deflecting Swat, and 2 islands. I'm up next with my personal favorite, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. This deck is jam-packed with odd CMC spells to cast for free with her attack trigger, and it wins through taking infinite turns. I start the game with a Thief of Sanity, Scroll Rack, Commander Sphere, Rise of the Dark Realms, Arcane Sanctum, Godless Shrine, and a snow-covered swamp. New to the channel is 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻, and he's brought with him the Scarab God. He's earned the nickname the Demon Lord in our playgroup for brewing up some crazy powerful decks. This one is pretty straightforward. It aims to fill his opponent's graveyards and reanimate all the best creatures. He keeps a starting 7 consisting of Sheoldred, Whispering One, Pool from Tomorrow, Chromatic Lantern, Temple of Deceit, Darkwater Catacombs, and 2 islands. With the introductions out of the way, let's start the game. Daniel starts us off by playing an island. He taps it to cast a Sol Ring. 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻 drops a Temple of Deceit on the field and scries 1 card to the bottom. I play a tapped Arcane Sanctum and end my turn. Matt plays a Mountain. He taps the Mountain to play his own Sol Ring and passes. Daniel drops another island on the field and leaves all his mana up and passes. 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻 follows in Daniel's footsteps and plays an island and passes. I choose to be different and play a snow-covered island as my land for turn, then pay 2 mana to cast a Scroll Rack. Matt starts his turn by playing a Scalding Tarn. He pays 1 life to sack it and search up a Blood Crypt. He pays an additional 2 life to have it come in untapped. He then taps all 4 mana to cast a Solemn Simulacrum. And he goes into his library again, searches up a swamp to the field tapped. Daniel draws for turn and casts a Spellbook for 0 and simply passes the turn. 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻 starts his turn off by playing another island, tapping out and casting a Chromatic Lantern. With nothing else, he passes. I draw for turn, drop a snow-covered swamp on the field, then tap all my mana to cast a Commander Sphere. With nothing else, I pass to Matt. Matt plays an Arid Mesa as his land drop, and taps 5 mana to cast a Goldspan Dragon. He then moves to combat and swings the dragon at 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻 and the sad robot at me. He also creates a token as a result of the dragon attacking. Matt sacks the treasure for 2 black mana to cast a Dauthi Voidwalker. He then cracks his fetch to grab a mountain to the field and loses 1 life. Before he ends his turn, he taps the mountain to cast a Curse of Opulence and enchants me with it. Gee, thanks, Matt. Daniel draws for turn and casts a Memnite for 0. He follows that up by playing a Words of Wind and passes to 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻. 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻 plays a Darkwater Catacombs as his land for turn. He tapped 3 mana to cast a Burnished Heart. He follows that up by evoking a Shriekmaw, targeting Matt's Goldspan Dragon. Matt should create a treasure token from this, but misses it. On 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐻's end step, I use the Scroll Rack to exchange 3 cards from my hand with the top 3 cards from my library. I then untap and draw for turn. I play Snow-Covered Plains as my land, and tap all 5 mana to cast my commander, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. Matt untaps and draws for turn, moves straight into combat, and swings at me with the Void Walker. I can't block and take 3 damage, and Matt makes the treasure. He cracks the treasure and uses it to help cast his commander, Tibalt, Cosmic Imposter. As it enters, he creates an emblem, allowing him to play cards exiled with Tibalt. Matt activates his +2 ability to exile the top card from everyone's library. He plays my Mana Confluence as his land drop and passes to Daniel. Daniel draws for turn and moves straight into combat. He swings at me with the Memnite in order to create a treasure token. I block it with Yennet and the Memnite dies. He sacks the treasure for red mana and uses it to cast his commander, Jhoira, Weatherlight Captain.
I'm going to
Go off.
cast Mana Crypt.
He casts a Mana Crypt, but instead of drawing a card off of Jhoira, he pays 1 mana to bounce the Soul Ring back to his hand with the Words of Wind.
Keep on doing. I'm going to keep on tapping your mana, keep on replaying my artifacts, beg you guys bounce your mana. You will have no permanents for the rest of the game.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Because every time I do this, I'm going to keep on tapping my mana rocks for mana, and that'll give me the mana I need to keep on doing it. And every time I cast a trigger, I get to draw a card, but instead of doing that, I'm going to make you guys just bounce your permanents. So you guys are locked out of the game.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that was quick.
Alright.
On to game number 2. Oh, so did you happen to guess that the cEDH deck would wipe the floor with us the way it did? Because I sure did. I played against a few Jhoira decks and know firsthand how explosive it is. But that start from Matt was amazing. I think if Daniel hadn't ended the game that early, it would have definitely turned into a game of arch enemy. Well, anyways, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Just kidding, we wouldn't do that to you. We decided to run it back and try to get some revenge. This time, Matt keeps an opening hand of Tevish Zat, Vandal Blast, Mindstone, Witch's Cottage, Marsh Flats, Exotic Orchard, and a Swamp. Daniel starts off with another fast starting hand of Zurin Orb, Emery Lurker of the Loch, Chrome Mox, Simian Spirit Guide, Sai, Master Thopterist, Opt, and a Gemstone Caverns. My starting 7 is a lot quicker and consists of Aminaut to the Fate Shifter, Mana Crypt, Force of Will, Arcane Signet, Cavalier of Dawn, Arcane Sanctum, and a snow-covered island. And last but not least, Chow decides to keep a Soul Ring, Demonic Tutor, Wayfarer's Bauble, Bribery, Mind Twist, an island, and a swamp. Daniel starts game 2 by casting a Chrome Mox and choosing to imprint and opt. He then casts a Mana Crypt and taps 3 mana to cast Sai, Master Thopterist. He finally decides to play his first land, a Gemstone Cavern. Chow starts his turn by playing an island, tapping it and casting a Soul Ring. He taps the Soul Ring to put out a Wayfarer's Bauble and passes. Let's get it. Mana Crypt.
Oh my god, I'm so behind.
Arcane Signet.
Oh my god.
What is it?
No. Tap
I
that
didn't
for
know
black
we're
and
playing
blue.
cEDH, guys.
Baleful Strix. Draw a card.
Gosh.
That was a turn.
Hell yeah.
Better than
Dude,
mine.
I
my
go?
God.
You guys got
Yeah,
any free
go ahead.
spells? Okay.
Oh, this is gonna be so sad if you just go land.
Go.
Daniel loses his Mana Crypt trigger. Daniel draws and exiles a Simian Spirit Guide to add 1 red mana to his mana pool. He then spends 4 mana to cast his commander, Jhoira. But I counter it with the Force of Will, losing 1 life and exiling a Fierce Guardianship.
This is cEDH?
With nothing else, he ends the turn. Chow draws and plays a Swamp as his land. He taps a Soul Ring to activate the Wayfarer's Bauble, sacrificing it and searching up an island to the field tapped. I start by flipping my daughter Avicen's Ryan's World coin for the Mana Crypt trigger and take no damage. I move straight to combat and swing my Strix at Daniel for 1. I play a tapped Arcane Sanctum as my land drop, and Matt decides to crack his fetch, losing 1 life and searching up a tapped Blood Crypt to the battlefield. Matt plays a basic swamp as his land for turn, taps both mana to cast a Mind Stone, and ends his turn. Daniel loses another mana crypt trigger. He casts an Emry of the Loch for 1 blue mana, since he controls 2 artifacts. As she enters, Daniel mills his top 4 cards from his deck. He then pays nothing to cast a Zuran Orb, creating a 1/1 Thopter token from 𝐸. 𝐄𝐩𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐿 draws for turn and plays a nice washed out foil swamp as his land drop. He continues by casting Bribery, targeting Matt.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
It's funny.
I didn't think you would grab that one down as good right now.
I start my turn off by winning my mana crypt trigger and then paying 5 to cast my commander, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. I follow that up by playing a snow-covered island and pass to Matt. Matt plays a tapped Witch's Cottage as his land drop. He taps his 3 mana to cast Cunning Rhetoric and passes the turn to Daniel. Daniel starts his turn off, winning his mana crypt trigger. He taps 3 mana and delves away 4 cards to cast a Treasure Cruise to draw 3 cards. He follows this up by paying 2 life to cast a Gitaxian Probe, choosing to look at my hand, and draws another card. He then casts a Welding Jar for 0 and creates another Thopter token. He also plays a Lotus Petal for 0, creating yet another Thopter, and yet another 0 mana cost artifact, Everflowing Chalice, again creating another Thopter. Daniel then sacks the Lotus Petal, making a blue mana, and taps Emry to use her ability, allowing him to recast the Lotus Petal from the graveyard, making another Thopter. 𝐄𝐩 starts by playing another swamp. He then taps 6 mana to cast a Massacre Worm. With the spell in the stack, Daniel sacks the Lotus Petal and pays 2 mana to sack 2 Thopters to draw a card with 𝐸. The worm then resolves, killing off my Strix, and I lose 2 life, and 4 of Daniel's creatures, draining him for 8. 𝐄𝐩 moves into combat and swings the Tyrant at me, and steals my mana rocks. After that, he passes the turn. I untap, draw, I move straight to combat and swing my Yennet at 𝐄𝐩. Yennet's attack trigger goes off and reveals a Teferi's Protection. I choose not to cast it and draw it instead. 𝐄𝐩 takes a 3 damage, and I pass to Matt. Matt plays a mountain as his land drop, and plays an overloaded Vandal Blast, destroying all artifacts he doesn't control. With nothing else, he ends his turn. Daniel starts turn 5 by playing an island, and sadly just has to pass his turn to 𝐄𝐩. 𝐄𝐩 plays a Flooded Strand as his land drop. He then moves to combat and decides to swing at me with both his creatures. Before damage, I cast a Teferi's Protection and phase out, saving me 12 points of life. On his second main phase, he pays 1 life to sack the Flooded Strand and searches up a Sunken Hollow to the field. After that, he casts a Mind Twist, where X equals 4, targeting Matt, having him discard his hand.
But Jukabog, a gamble. My next play was a Planeswalker to make some dudes, and then land. Brutal. Okay, well. Go ahead.
Alright. I start my turn by phasing back in, and move straight into combat. I once again swing at 𝐄𝐩 with Yennet. Her attack trigger happens, and I reveal a Whisper Silk Cloak, which I choose to cast for free. On my second main phase, I cast an Orzhov Signet. I tap a land in the Signet to make 2 mana to equip the cloak to Yennet. Yes, I do know Yennet has Vigilance, and should stay untapped, but I don't catch it till later on. Matt draws a card, and chooses just to pass the turn. Daniel also draws, and can't do anything, so he just ends his turn. 𝐄𝐩 untaps and continues his reign of terror by moving into combat and once again swinging his creatures at me. Even if Yennet was untapped, I wouldn't have blocked, so I take the hit and drop down to 19. 𝐄𝐩 does take control of my artifacts, but the cloak remains on my commander until he equips it to another creature. On his second main phase, he taps 4 mana to cast Mind Slicer. With his last 2 mana, he goes to equip the cloak to the Hellkite Tyrant. but in response, Matt plays Terminate on the dragon, destroying it. After that, he passes the turn. I start my turn by missing another land drop and moving straight to combat. I swing at the Demon Lord again and trigger Yennet.
You guys are just going at it.
She reveals a Brainstorm, which I cast. I draw 3 cards and put 2 back on top of my library. I find a land out of the 3 and play a Temple of Enlightenment as my land drop, choosing not to scry. Matt draws for turn, plays a Field of the Dead, and passes to Daniel. Turn 7 starts with Daniel playing a Paradise Mantle for 0 and creating a Thopter token from Sai. He then moves to combat and chooses to swing at Matt for 1, allowing him to exile the top card of Daniel's deck with the Cunning Rhetoric. He exiles the Thought Cast, and Matt takes 1 damage. After that, he passes to 𝐄. 𝐄 untaps and draws for turn. He taps 2 to cast Demonic Tutor and goes searching for a card to put in his hand. 𝐄 moves to combat and again swings at me for 10. I take the hit and drop down to 9. On his second main, he showed us what he's tutored for. Another tutor of sorts, cEDH, Undead Vizier. He chooses to exploit the Mind Slicer, and each player discards their hand.
I discard
So,
ⴍⴜᴜᴜᴜ Phyrexian Arena.
Oh, you did tutor first.
Temporal Trespass, Aminatu, Elish Norn, Emrakul,
Oh my
Cavalier Dawn.
God, that is some juicy Scarab God targets.
He then tutors for another card, and passes the turn to me. I start by once again missing a land drop and moving straight into combat. I swing my Yennet at 𝐄 again, and this time hit it big by casting ⴑ the Infinite Gyre for free. I choose to destroy 𝐄's Massacre Worm with its cast trigger, and then follow that up by playing a Solemn Simulacrum and going and finding a swamp to the field tapped, and then end my turn.
Daniel, I'm scared.
Matt starts his turn by tapping 4 to cast Daniel's exiled card, Thought Cast, to draw 2 cards. He finds an Urborg and plays it as his land drop. He then taps a mountain to cast Curse of Opulence, this time thankfully on 𝐄 and not on me. After that, he ends his turn. Daniel draws for turn and pays 1 mana to cast Preordain, scrying 1 to the top and the other to the bottom, and then drawing a card. He then moves into combat and swings a Thopter at 𝐄, creating a treasure for him and Matt from the curse. On his second main, Daniel casts a Mox Diamond but has no land to discard and is only able to net a Thopter off the play. After that, he ships the turn. 𝐄 keeps dropping bombs on his turn by casting a Consecrated Sphinx, and follows it up with a Training Grounds. With nothing else, he ends his turn. On my turn, I finally realized what I've been doing wrong the entire game. That was as Vigilance I've been attacking. When I draw for turn, 𝐄 reminds the table he gets to draw 2 cards. I play Snow-Covered Plains as my land drop and move to combat, and I continue my assault on 𝐄. I choose to trigger the Yennet first and reveal an island and put it to my hand. Then the Annihilator trigger goes off. 𝐄 chooses to sack a land and cEDH, and my 2 artifacts. Matt and I both create treasure tokens from the curse, and then I pass my turn. 𝐄, you want to stop picking on each other?
Well, yeah.
Matt untaps and draws. He finds and plays a Cabal Coffers as his land for turn, creating a 2/2 zombie. 𝐄 then remembers to draw his 2 cards. Matt activates the Cabal Coffers, generating 7 black mana, and uses 6 of it to pay for his commander, Tibalt, Cosmic Instigator. He uses his +2 ability to exile the top card of each player's library. He chooses to cast my Soul Ring with the 1 floating black mana. Matt then makes the risky play of casting Daniel's Gamble. This is quite a gamble when you only have 1 card in hand.
Right.
Even, odd. Even.
He denies it to this day, but I'm 100% certain that's what he tutored for. Matt wraps up his turn by casting his Yawgmoth from exile. Daniel starts off turn 9, sacking his treasure to cast a Mystical Tutor. And searching up a Wheel of Fortune to the top of his library. He points out that if the Sphinx isn't taken care of, 𝐿 will be drawing a ton of cards. 𝐿 untaps and draws. He plays a land for turn, followed by a Mana Crypt. He moves to combat and swings at me with his Sphinx. I choose to block with Yennet, and they bounce off of one another. On his second main phase, 𝐿 casts his commander, the Scarab God. He then taps 2 to activate the Scarab God's ability to eternalize the Massacre Wurm. In response, Matt sacks a zombie to activate Yawgmoth's ability, paying 1 life, drawing a card, and putting a -1/-1 counter on the Sphinx. Daniel also uses Sai to sack his Thopters to draw a card. When the worm enters, it gives all creatures -2/-2, which finishes off my Yennet and kills the sad robot. When it dies, I draw a card and lose 4 life from the worm. Since we each drew a card, 𝐿 gets to load up his hand with 6 more cards. I draw for turn, and 𝐿 draws 2 more. I then move to combat and set my sights on 𝐿 again, creating a treasure token for Matt and I. He sacrifices 4 more permanents to the Annihilator trigger, and chooses to block with the Massacre Wurm. I follow that up with the Blatant Thievery. It resolves, and I choose to steal Matt's Tibalt, Daniel's Sai, and 𝐿's Scarab God. I then activate the +2 on Tibalt and exile the top card of everyone's deck, except my own, even though I reminded Matt all night about it. Matt starts his turn by playing a Bloodstained Mire and creating a zombie token. He then pays 1 life to fetch up a mountain to the field, making another zombie. He then pays a mana to crack the Mind Stone in order to draw a card. He once again activates Cabal Coffers for 8 black mana, using 6 of it to cast Bolas's Citadel. Matt uses Yawgmoth to sack a zombie, pay 1 life, draw a card, and put a -1/-1 counter on the Scarab God. He looks at the top card again with the Citadel and pays 3 life to cast 𝐵𝑟𝑔𝑒. Matt pays another 5 life to cast the Author of Shadows, creating a red mana off of 𝐵𝑟𝑔𝑒 and exiling all opponents' graveyards, but is able to choose a card from among them to cast as long as it's in exile. He looks through my graveyard and decides on Emrakul, the Promised End. He pays 8 mana to cast it with the cost reduction and gains 1 red mana from 𝐵𝑟𝑔𝑒. He then chooses to take my next turn with Emrakul's cast trigger. Matt then uses a treasure and his floating mana to help pay for a Blood Moon, and ends his turn. Daniel finally has red mana to use on his turn thanks to the Blood Moon, and cast a Wheel of Fortune. We all discard our hands and draw a fresh 7. Next, he plays a Chimeric Mass, paying 1 to have it enter with 1 charge counter on it, and then passes to 𝐿. 𝐿 starts by tapping 4 mana to cast Ravenous Chupacabra, targeting Emrakul.
That can kill a spaghetti monster.
Yeah.
Poor Emrakul's had it tough.
Jeez, the Chupacabra just gonna ate an Emrakul.
Emrakul's had it rough this game.
He spends his last 2 mana to cast a Dimir Signet, and with nothing else, ships the turn. On his end step, I crack my 2 treasures to deny Matt any more mana while he takes my turn. Matt starts my turn by going to combat and swinging the Scarab God at Daniel and 𝐴𝐿𝐼 at 𝐄𝐩. 𝐄𝐩 has to sacrifice 4 more permanents to 𝐴𝐿𝐼 and blocks the Titan. Matt then decides to use Tibalt's -8 ability to exile all cards from all graveyards and adds 3 red mana to his mana pool. He uses the mana to help pay for an 𝐿𝐼𝐼𝐿, which he then mana drains. Matt then does his best to dwindle my life down by shocking in a Hallowed Fountain and taking me to 3. I now start my extra turn from Emrakul with 9 colorless mana from the mana drain. I drop a Mistgate Pathway as my land drop, followed by tapping 2 black and using 7 of the floating mana to cast a Plague Wind. I decide to take up Tibalt again, this time remembering to exile my own card. I cast a Soothsaying and use the final 2 colorless mana to look at the top 2 cards of my library. When I move into combat, I finally start to spread the love and attack Matt for 14. I exile a card from my library with the Cunning Rhetoric.
Just let me win on turn 2.
Matt takes a hit and has to sacrifice 4 permanents and drops down to 13. Matt draws for turn and looks at the top card of his deck with the Citadel. He chooses to play my Temple of Deceit, scrying the top card to the bottom and creating a zombie token. He then plays the top card of his library and pays no life to cast a Jeweled Lotus. Matt continues by casting a Jeska's Will, choosing to exile the top 3 cards of his library. Matt again activates his Cabal Coffers for 7 black mana, using 1 of it to cast a Brainstone, and uses 2 more of the mana to sacrifice it and Brainstorm. He then pays 4 life to cast Mizzix's Mastery to copy the Jeska's Will. Matt uses 1 floating mana to cast a Soul Ring from the exiled pile, and the remaining 3 to cast Phyrexian Arena. He continues by tapping the Soul Ring and 1 to cast a Sword of Feast and Famine. With nothing else to do, he ships the turn. Daniel starts his turn by casting an Engineered Explosives for 0, and follows that up by playing a tapped Spire Bluff Canal as his land for turn. 𝐿 loses his mana crypt trigger and loses 3 life, and drops an Urborg on the field as his land drop. He taps 3 to cast a Burnished Heart, and with his last 2 mana, a pair of Swiftfoot Boots. On his end step, I flash in a Teferi, Mage's Zhalfir. With the window to respond closing, Matt chooses to take 3 damage to play Fire Covenant and pays 4 more life to deal enough damage to the Scarab God to kill it. Daniel then responds with a Pact of Negation to counter the Teferi. Before I take my turn, I use 2 mana to rearrange the top of my library with the Soothsaying. I untap and draw for turn. Then cast a Diluvian Primordial, choosing to only cast Matt's Mizzix's Mastery from his graveyard. I cast it and copy my Expropriate. The table chooses money, and I choose time. So I choose to steal the Jeweled Lotus from Matt, an island from Daniel, and the boots from 𝐿. I equip the Primordial with the boots. Next I use Tibalt's -3 ability to exile Matt's zombie. Then I head into combat, swinging the Primordial at Matt and 𝐴𝐿𝐼 at 𝐿, knocking them both out of the game. Before I end my turn, I play a Mana Confluence. On my end step, Daniel pays 2 to blow up the engineered explosives to blow up all permanents with CMC 0, blowing up the Paradise Mantle. I then move to my extra turn, and Daniel sees the writing on the wall and scoops it up. So you may have noticed a mistake that was made at the end of the game. The Mizzix Mastery should not have been in Matt's graveyard. It and the Jessica's Will should have been exiled, but we missed it. So the whole expropriate play would not have worked. However, I don't believe it changes the outcome in the slightest. The correct line of play I could have taken was hit Matt for 1 with Psy, causing him to die to his own Phyrexian Arena on his draw step. Daniel would have still had to pay for his Pact of Negation, leaving him with nothing to do on his turn, and 𝐿 was dead to the Ulamog. It was an oversight we didn't catch during the game, but like I said, Ulamog pretty much had the game wrapped up for me, with or without expropriate resolving. If I hadn't kept that Force of Will hand, this episode would have been 2 games of Jhoira just dominating the table, since Daniel claims he probably could have won as early as turn 2 or turn 3. I would like to thank you all for tuning into our channel for our weekly gameplay video. 20 episodes is a pretty big milestone for us, since a lot of work goes into creating this content. If you do enjoy the content we create, consider joining our Patreon, like the fine people listed below. Not only are you contributing to the channel's growth, you are also entering our monthly Secret Lair giveaway and will receive other patron-only perks and merch as well. We here at In Response would like to thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow us on our social medias. We also stream every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day.